The silence in the Galactic Council chambers was deafening. Ambassador Kethvar of the Zephyrian Empire shifted uncomfortably in his bioluminescent seat, his four eyes darting between the holographic displays showing the aftermath of what his people had done. The images were brutal, clinical, and damning. Entire human colonies reduced to ash and bone. Peaceful farming settlements turned into craters. Children's toys scattered among the rubble of what had once been thriving communities. "The evidence is overwhelming," declared Chancellor Vasquez, the ancient reptilian leader whose species had founded the Council 3 millennia ago. His voice carried the weight of eons, each word carefully measured. The Zephyrian Fourth Fleet conducted systematic orbital bombardments of 17 human civilian settlements across the Kepler sector. Total casualties exceed 2.3 million souls. Ambassador Kethvar's translator implant crackled as he struggled to find words. The Zephyrians were a proud warrior race, their society built on conquest and honor through combat. But, even by their standards, what had happened in the Kepler sector was excessive. The human colonies were in violation of the Neutral Zone Treaty, he finally managed, his voice lacking its usual conviction. "Farming settlements," Chancellor Vasquez replied coldly. "Growing crops that had been approved by this very council. The violations you speak of are cartographical errors in your own navigation systems." The holographic display shifted, showing detailed scans of the destroyed colonies. Wheat fields stretched endlessly, interrupted only by modest settlements with basic infrastructure. No weapons platforms. No military installations. No defensive capabilities beyond basic atmospheric shields for weather protection. These were not strategic targets or military outposts. They were homes. Trade Representative Nixera, a crystalline being whose species served as the Council's economic advisors, chimed in with a sound like breaking glass. "The economic implications are severe. Humanity had become a significant agricultural supplier to 47 different systems. The loss of these colonies will create food shortages that could destabilize entire sectors." But, it was the empty seat that commanded the most attention. The human delegation's chair remained vacant, a stark reminder of the species that had once been considered the Council's most promising new member. Humanity had joined the galactic community only 80 years ago, but they had quickly established themselves as reliable traders, innovative engineers, and surprisingly effective diplomats despite their youth among the stars. "Where is the human delegation?" asked Security Chief Thaindor, a massive insectoid whose species had served as peacekeepers for generations. "Standard protocol requires their presence for these proceedings." Chancellor Vasquez's expression grew troubled. The human ambassador was recalled to Earth immediately following the attacks. "Their government has been unusually quiet about the entire matter." This was highly irregular. Typically, when member species faced aggression, they immediately appealed to the Council for protection and justice. They would present evidence, demand reparations, and seek military intervention if necessary. The humans had done none of these things. Instead, they had simply withdrawn from all galactic affairs as if they had never existed in the cosmic community. "Have they filed any formal complaints?" asked Representative Qualith, whose aquatic species handled most of the Council's bureaucratic functions. "None," Chancellor Vasquez confirmed. "No demands for reparations. No calls for military intervention. No requests for Council investigation. They have simply gone silent." Ambassador Kethvar felt a chill despite his species' natural resilience to cold. In all his years of diplomatic service, he had never encountered a response like this. Species that suffered attacks typically responded with outrage, demands for justice, or at minimum, some form of communication. The human silence was unprecedented and deeply unsettling. "Perhaps they recognize the futility of challenging the Zephyrian Empire," he suggested, though even he didn't believe his own words. Humanity had never shown any indication of being easily intimidated. If anything, their brief history in galactic affairs showed a species that was remarkably stubborn when they believed they were in the right. A holographic display changed again, showing intelligence reports from across human space. What they revealed was even more disturbing than the silence. Human trade ships had stopped visiting other systems entirely. Human research stations had ceased all external communications. Even human tourists, who had become a common sight in many systems due to their insatiable curiosity about other cultures, had completely disappeared from galactic society. It's as if they've severed all contact with the galaxy, observed Trade Representative Nixera. Our economic models suggest this level of self-imposed isolation would be catastrophically expensive for their civilization. They must be planning something. Security Chief Thaindor's compound eyes focused on the data streams. Intelligence reports from the Sol system are unusual. Our long-range sensors detect massive energy signatures throughout human space. Industrial activity has increased by over 300% in the past 6 months. But we cannot determine the nature of what they're building. This information sent ripples of unease throughout the assembled delegates. The humans had always been industrious, but this level of sudden expansion suggested something far beyond normal economic development. It looked like a species preparing for something significant. Have any diplomatic overtures been made? Asked Chancellor Vasquez. Multiple attempts, confirmed Ambassador Kethvar, reviewing his datapad. We've sent envoys to 12 different human systems. All were turned away at the border with the same message: human space is currently closed to external visitors. We will resume diplomatic contact when ready. When ready for what? Security Chief Thaindor demanded. That was the question that haunted everyone in the chamber. The humans had given no timeline, no explanation, no indication of what they were preparing for. It was as if an entire species had decided to hold its breath and wait for something. Chancellor Vasquez called up additional data streams. Our xenopsychology experts have been analyzing human behavior patterns. Their preliminary report suggests that humans may be experiencing a cultural trauma response on a species-wide level. The attacks triggered something in their collective consciousness that we don't fully understand. The xenopsychology report painted a picture of humanity that few in the galaxy truly comprehended. Unlike most species that had evolved in stable environments or faced predictable evolutionary pressures, humans had emerged from a world where survival required constant adaptation to extreme challenges. Their history was filled with mass extinctions, climate catastrophes, and resource scarcity that would have wiped out less resilient species. According to the analysis, Chancellor Vasquez continued, humans possess what their own scientists call survival redundancy. When faced with existential threats, they don't just respond with immediate defensive measures. They fundamentally restructure their entire society to ensure that particular type of threat can never endanger them again. Ambassador Kethvar scoffed. Psychological theories aside, they remain a young species with limited military capability. The Zephyrian Empire has conquered 17 systems. Our fleets are among the most powerful in known space. But, even as he spoke these words, Kethvar couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial. The human silence wasn't the response of a defeated species. It felt more like the calm before a storm. Trade Representative Nixera's crystalline form pulsed with concern. Economic intelligence suggests something unprecedented. Human industrial complexes are consuming resources at rates that should have bankrupted their economy within weeks. Yet their financial systems remain stable. They've either discovered new resource sources or developed revolutionary efficiency improvements. Or they're preparing for war on a scale we can't imagine, Security Chief Thaindor said grimly. The thought sent a collective shudder through the assembly. Galactic warfare typically followed established patterns. Fleets engaged in formal battles, territories were claimed or defended according to recognized protocols, and conflicts were resolved through either decisive military victory or negotiated settlements. The idea of a species fundamentally altering the nature of warfare itself was almost unthinkable. Chancellor Vasquez accessed the Council's deepest archives, searching for any historical precedent that might explain human behavior. What he found was troubling. In the rare instances where human colonies had faced threats in the past, their responses had been swift, decisive, and often disproportionate to the original provocation. But those had been local incidents involving individual colonies or trade disputes. Nothing in their history provided a template for understanding their current behavior. There may be another factor to consider, Chancellor Vasquez said slowly. Human social structure is unlike most species in the galaxy. They organize themselves into multiple competing nations rather than unified planetary governments. This tribal structure makes them difficult to predict because different human groups can pursue contradictory strategies simultaneously. Are you suggesting some human factions might respond differently than others? Asked Representative Qualif. I'm suggesting we may not be dealing with a single coordinated response. Human complexity makes it possible for them to be preparing multiple different reactions to the Zephyrian attacks, some of which might be beyond our ability to anticipate. Ambassador Kethvar felt his confidence wavering. The Zephyrian Empire had built its reputation on understanding and defeating their enemies through superior military force and strategic planning. But humans seemed to operate according to principles that didn't match any known patterns of galactic civilization. Regardless of their psychological profile, he said, attempting to regain his diplomatic footing, the Zephyrian Empire maintains that our actions in the Kepler sector were justified responses to human territorial violations. We are prepared to negotiate appropriate reparations for any excessive damage, but we will not apologize for defending our sovereign space. The statement fell flat in the council chambers. Even Ambassador Kethvar knew it sounded weak and unconvincing. The evidence was too clear, the human settlements too obviously civilian, the attacks too systematic to be dismissed as border security measures. Chancellor Voske deactivated the holographic displays. This session is adjourned pending further information about human intentions. All member species are advised to monitor developments in human space and report any significant changes to the Council immediately. As the delegates filed out of the chambers, each was left with the same uncomfortable questions. What were the humans planning? How would they respond to an attack that had killed over 2 million of their people? And why did their silence feel so much more threatening than any declaration of war could have been? In the corridors outside the council chambers, smaller groups of delegates gathered to discuss the situation privately. The consensus was unanimous: something significant was about to happen. The humans' response would either reshape their understanding of galactic civilization or confirm that young species were ultimately powerless against established military powers. But, deep in their various hearts, minds, and consciousness matrices, most delegates suspected they were about to witness something unprecedented. Humanity's silence wasn't the quiet of defeat. It was the silence of a species that had decided to fundamentally change the rules of engagement. The galaxy would soon discover what that meant. 6 months after the Galactic Council's emergency session, the first signs appeared. Captain Veltar of the Zephyrian Border Patrol was conducting a routine inspection of the neutral zone when his sensors detected something that made his blood run cold. Where empty space should have stretched between star systems, massive structures now floated in the void. Not ships, not space stations, but something entirely different. Scan those objects, he ordered his tactical officer, trying to keep the tremor out of his voice. Captain, the structures are. I've never seen anything like them. They appear to be defensive platforms, but the energy signatures are completely unknown. They're generating some kind of field that extends for millions of kilometers in every direction. Captain Veltar enhanced the visual displays, and what he saw defied explanation. The human constructs looked like metallic flowers blooming in the darkness of space, their petals formed from materials that seemed to bend light around them. Each structure was roughly the size of a small moon, but their energy output suggested power sources far beyond anything in the galactic database. How many are there? He asked. Sir, long-range sensors detect similar structures positioned throughout human space. Conservative estimates suggest over 10,000 platforms have been deployed in the past 6 months. The implications hit Captain Veltar like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just been silent during their withdrawal from galactic society. They had been building the largest defensive network in recorded galactic history. But, even more disturbing was the speed of construction. Creating 10,000 moon-sized platforms should have taken centuries using known technology. The humans had managed it in months. Communications: send an immediate priority transmission to Zephyrian Command. Include all sensor data and visual records. Classification level maximum. But, even as he gave the order, Captain Veltar noticed something else. The nearest human platform had begun to glow with a soft blue light. Not the harsh radiation of weapons charging, but something almost organic in its intensity. Captain, we're being scanned, his tactical officer reported. The scanning method is completely unfamiliar. It's as if they're examining our ship down to the molecular level. Any hostile intent detected? No, sir. It feels more like curiosity. They're studying us. Captain Veltar had spent 20 years patrolling the borders of the Zephyrian Empire. He knew the difference between a military scan and scientific investigation. What his ship was experiencing felt like the latter, but with a thoroughness that was deeply unsettling. It was as if the humans were cataloging every detail of Zephyrian technology for future reference. The scan lasted exactly 3 minutes, and then the blue glow faded. The human platform returned to its previous state of quiet observation. No communications were attempted. No warnings were issued. The message was clear: we see you. We know you're there. We are watching. Captain Veltar ordered an immediate withdrawal to Zephyrian space. As his ship jumped to hyperspace, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. The humans weren't just building defenses. They were making a statement that would reshape galactic civilization. Meanwhile, on Earth, the true scope of humanity's response was becoming clear to those with the highest security clearances. President Chen stood in the command center of the Global Defense Initiative, watching holographic displays that showed the deployment of humanity's new defensive network across dozens of star systems. Status report, she requested from Admiral Harrison, the military officer overseeing the project. All primary installations are operational ahead of schedule. The manufacturing rate has exceeded our most optimistic projections. We're now producing defensive platforms faster than we can deploy them. The manufacturing capability itself was humanity's first revolution. Faced with the need to defend dozens of star systems against potential attack, human engineers had developed self-replicating construction systems that could harvest raw materials from asteroids and gas giants, then transform those resources into defensive platforms using entirely automated processes. What about the new technologies? President Chen asked. Beyond our expectations, Admiral Harrison replied. The crash research program has yielded breakthroughs that would have taken decades under normal circumstances. Necessity really has been the mother of invention. The technologies humanity had developed during their 6 months of isolation would have been considered impossible by galactic standards. Defensive shields that could absorb and redirect energy attacks with near-perfect efficiency. Sensor networks that could detect ships at ranges that made stealth virtually impossible. And, most importantly, weapons systems that operated according to principles that no other species had ever developed. The psychological impact appears to be significant, added Dr. Sarah Kim, the xenopsychology advisor who had been monitoring galactic reactions. Intelligence reports suggest that other species are struggling to understand what we've built. The Zephyrians in particular seem deeply unsettled. President Chen nodded grimly. The goal wasn't just to defend human space. It was to fundamentally alter the galactic balance of power so that what had happened in the Kepler sector could never happen again. Not just to humans, but to any species. What about the Council's attempts at diplomatic contact? She asked. We've received 47 separate requests for meetings, negotiations, or simple communication. All ignored according to protocol. Let them wonder what we're planning. The strategy was deliberately psychological. Humanity's silence served multiple purposes. It prevented other species from understanding their capabilities until deployment was complete. It created uncertainty that would make potential aggressors hesitate before attacking anyone. And, most importantly, it gave human engineers time to develop technologies that would make their response truly unprecedented. Phase 2 is ready for implementation, Admiral Harrison reported. All manufacturing centers are prepared to begin production of the mobile platforms. President Chen paused before giving her authorization. Phase 1 had been about defense. Phase 2 would be about demonstrating that humanity could project power anywhere in the galaxy if threatened. The mobile platforms would serve as both exploration vessels and a visible reminder that human space was no longer isolated from galactic affairs. Begin Phase 2, she ordered. Across human space, the manufacturing centers that had been producing defensive platforms immediately began retooling for a different kind of construction project. Where the defensive platforms were designed to protect specific locations, the mobile platforms would carry human technology throughout the galaxy as both explorers and guardians. 3 weeks later, the first mobile platforms emerged from their construction facilities and began their journey toward the borders of human space. Unlike traditional spacecraft, these vessels seemed to flow through space rather than traveling through it, their movement patterns suggesting technology that operated beyond conventional physics. The galactic intelligence networks detected them immediately, but what they observed defied explanation. The human vessels weren't using any known form of propulsion. They moved without generating detectable energy signatures, changed direction without apparent thrust mechanisms, and maintained perfect formation across distances that should have made coordination impossible. Ambassador Kethvar was in his private quarters on the Zephyrian homeworld when the emergency communications arrived. The message was brief but terrifying: human mobile platforms have entered Zephyrian space. Repeat, unknown human vessels are now operating within our sovereign territory. He rushed to the nearest command center, where Zephyrian military leaders were frantically trying to make sense of sensor data that seemed to contradict itself. The human platforms were definitely present, but they appeared to exist in multiple locations simultaneously. When Zephyrian ships moved to intercept them, the humans would simply fade away like mirages, only to reappear elsewhere. How many platforms are there? Ambassador Kethvar asked. We can't determine an accurate count, replied Admiral Zasketh, the Zephyrian military commander. They appear to be using some form of stealth technology that makes them simultaneously visible and invisible. Our best estimate is anywhere between 50 and 5,000. What are they doing? Nothing aggressive. They seem to be conducting detailed scans of our systems, but they're not approaching our planets or military installations. It's as if they're taking inventory. The realization sent a chill through Ambassador Kethvar. The humans weren't preparing for a traditional military campaign. They were gathering intelligence on a scale that suggested something far more comprehensive than revenge for the Kepler sector attacks. Have they responded to any communication attempts? No, sir. They ignore all hails, demands, and even direct challenges. But they're clearly aware of our presence because they avoid any actions that could be interpreted as immediately threatening. The psychological impact was devastating. Zephyrian space forces found themselves completely unable to either engage or ignore the human platforms. They were being observed, studied, and catalogued by a species that seemed to have developed capabilities beyond anything in the galactic database. Similar reports were arriving from every major spacefaring civilization. Human platforms were appearing throughout the galaxy, conducting systematic surveys of industrial capabilities, defensive installations, and population centers. Not attacking, not threatening, just observing with a thoroughness that implied future action. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session within 72 hours of the first platform sightings. This time, every member species sent their highest-ranking representatives. The human chair remained empty, but their presence was felt throughout the galaxy in a way that made formal diplomatic representation seem almost irrelevant. Chancellor Vasquez called the session to order, his ancient composure showing signs of strain. The matter before us is unprecedented in the history of galactic civilization. A member species has deployed military assets throughout the territories of other sovereign nations without declaration of war, statement of intent, or diplomatic communication. Are they military assets? Asked Trade Representative Nick Serra. The platforms don't appear to be armed in any conventional sense. Intelligence gathering of this scope is a military action, replied Security Chief Thane Dor. Whether or not they carry weapons, the human platforms represent a fundamental challenge to galactic sovereignty. Ambassador Kethvar found himself in the uncomfortable position of agreeing with species that had traditionally opposed Zephyrian expansion. The platforms must be considered a hostile act. Their presence in our space cannot be tolerated. Then, do something about it, suggested Representative Qualith with what might have been irony coming from an aquatic species. The challenge hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Every species present knew that their military forces had proven incapable of engaging the human platforms. Traditional weapons couldn't lock onto targets that seemed to exist in multiple locations simultaneously. Conventional tactics were useless against opponents who could appear and disappear at will. Perhaps, Chancellor Vasquez said carefully, it's time to reconsider our approach to this situation. The humans have clearly developed capabilities that exceed our previous understanding of their civilization. Continued antagonism may not serve anyone's interests. Ambassador Kethvar's pride rebelled against the suggestion of backing down, but his practical diplomatic experience recognized the wisdom in Chancellor Vasquez's words. The Zephyrian Empire had provoked a response that was beyond their ability to counter through traditional means. "What do you propose?" he asked reluctantly. "Formal communication through official channels. An acknowledgement that the situation in the Kepler sector may have been mishandled. And a request for negotiations to establish new protocols for human galactic relations." It was as close to an admission of wrongdoing as anyone would get from the Galactic Council. But, even as the delegates discussed the possibility of peaceful resolution, reports continued to arrive about human platforms appearing in new systems, conducting their mysterious surveys, and demonstrating capabilities that suggested the galaxy was about to discover what humanity really meant by self-defense. The humans weren't just responding to an attack. They were reshaping the fundamental nature of galactic civilization to ensure that no species would ever again face the kind of systematic destruction that had befallen the Kepler sector colonies. The real question was no longer what the humans were planning. It was whether the galaxy was ready for what humanity had become during their months of silence. The message arrived simultaneously across every inhabited system in the galaxy. Not through diplomatic channels or official communications networks, but directly into the consciousness of every sentient being capable of receiving it. The method of transmission was impossible according to known science, yet undeniably real. When it came, the voice was unmistakably human, speaking in perfect unity as if an entire species had found a single voice to address the galaxy. "This is humanity. We speak now not as individual nations or colonies, but as one people who have learned a fundamental truth about existence among the stars. For 6 months, we have listened to your debates, observed your reactions, and studied your capabilities. We have reached conclusions that will reshape galactic civilization. The massacre in the Kepler sector was not an act of war. It was not a territorial dispute. It was not even a failure of diplomacy. It was the systematic extermination of civilians conducted by a military force against targets that posed no threat to anyone. This action demonstrated that current galactic civilization considers some species to be acceptable losses in political calculations. We reject this principle absolutely. Today we announce the implementation of the Human Protection Protocols. Any attack on civilian populations anywhere in the galaxy will be considered an attack on humanity itself. Any species that conducts systematic extermination campaigns will face immediate intervention from human forces. Any government that declares certain populations to be acceptable casualties will find their sovereignty challenged by human authority. This is not negotiable. This is not subject to Galactic Council approval. This is not open to diplomatic compromise. We have spent these months building capabilities that make enforcement possible. You have seen our defensive networks. You have witnessed our mobile platforms. You have experienced our ability to observe activities throughout galactic space. What you have not yet seen is our commitment to using these capabilities whenever civilian populations face systematic destruction. The galaxy now operates under new rules. Attacks on military targets between consenting governments remain internal matters. Territorial disputes between spacefaring civilizations remain subject to existing protocols. But the deliberate targeting of civilian populations for destruction has become humanity's responsibility to prevent. We do not seek to rule the galaxy. We seek to eliminate the possibility that what happened in the Kepler sector could happen anywhere to anyone. This message constitutes our only warning. The transmission ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving every populated world in stunned silence. The implications were staggering. Humanity had effectively declared themselves the guardians of civilian populations throughout the galaxy, with the technological capability to enforce this declaration against any opposition. Chancellor Vasquez was the first to recover his composure in the council chambers. This is unprecedented. A single species cannot unilaterally impose military authority across galactic space. The sovereignty of member nations. His words trailed off as the holographic displays activated without being commanded. The images that appeared showed human mobile platforms materializing above every major inhabited world in the galaxy simultaneously. Not threatening positions, but clearly visible demonstrations that humanity could reach anywhere they chose, whenever they chose. Ambassador Kethvar watched in horror as the displays showed platforms appearing above the Zephyrian homeworld, capital colonies, and major industrial centers. The message was clear: human protection of civilian populations was now backed by the ability to project power instantly to any location in known space. "How is this possible?" he whispered. "The distances involved, the coordination required, no species has ever demonstrated capabilities like this." Trade Representative Nick Serra's crystalline form was pulsing with rapid calculations. "Economic analysis suggests they've fundamentally altered the nature of space travel and communication. Traditional limitations based on physics appear to no longer apply to human technology." But it was Security Chief Thane Dor who voiced what everyone was thinking: they're not bluffing. The technological demonstrations prove they have the capability to enforce these protocols anywhere in the galaxy. The first test came within hours of humanity's declaration. On the far edge of galactic space, the Kralti hegemony had been conducting what they called population optimization in systems they had recently conquered. The process involved systematically eliminating what they considered inferior genetic lines among the conquered populations. By their calculations, this was simple efficiency: resources devoted to unproductive population segments could be better allocated to strengthening their empire. The Kralti had never been members of the Galactic Council. They considered themselves superior to species that wasted time on diplomatic protocols. Their expansion had been tolerated because their territory was remote and their victims were typically pre-spaceflight civilizations with no representation in galactic affairs. When the human message had been received, Overlord Keshmak had dismissed it as meaningless posturing. Humanity was a young species with delusions of grandeur. Their protection protocols would prove to be empty threats when faced with a truly powerful civilization. The Kralti continued their population optimization scheduled for the Velnari system, where they had recently subjugated a peaceful agricultural civilization. The operation was routine: orbital bombardment of population centers designated as genetically inferior, followed by resource allocation to strengthen the remaining workforce. The first bombardment ships reached their targets and began charging their weapons systems. The Velnari below were aware of what was coming but had no means of defense. Their technology was centuries behind their conquerors, their weapons incapable of reaching orbital targets. Then, human platforms materialized. Not one or two scout vessels, but hundreds of mobile platforms surrounding the Kralti bombardment fleet in perfect formation. The arrival was instantaneous, without the energy signatures or spatial distortions that should have accompanied such massive transportation of material. "Unknown vessels, identify yourselves," commanded Fleet Admiral Gestalk, though he already knew what he was facing. The human response came not through communications channels, but directly into the consciousness of every Kralti crew member: this is humanity. You are in violation of the protection protocols. Cease bombardment operations immediately and withdraw from this system. Admiral Gestalk had not achieved his position by backing down from challenges. Human vessels, you are interfering in internal Kralti affairs. Our sovereignty in this system is recognized by right of conquest. Withdraw immediately or face military action. The human platforms made no threatening moves. No weapons charged. No aggressive formations were assumed. Instead, something impossible happened. Every Kralti ship in the bombardment fleet simply stopped working. Not destroyed, not damaged, but rendered completely inoperable. Life support continued functioning. Emergency lighting remained active. But weapons systems, engines, communications, and navigation all ceased to respond to commands. "What have you done to our ships?" Admiral Gestalk demanded through emergency transmitters. The human response was calm and matter-of-fact: "We have temporarily disabled your capability to conduct bombardment operations. Your crews are unharmed. Your ships will be fully restored to functionality when you withdraw from this system and cease population optimization activities." For the first time in Kralti military history, an entire fleet found itself completely helpless without having been attacked in any conventional sense. The humans had somehow reached directly into their ship's systems and selectively disabled only those components necessary for offensive operations. "This is impossible," Admiral Gestalk muttered. "Our systems are hardened against all known forms of electronic interference." "Your systems are hardened against all previously known forms of interference," came the correction. "We have developed methods that operate according to principles your technology cannot detect or counter." Below on the planet's surface, the Velnari watched in amazement as the bombardment that would have killed millions of their people simply didn't happen. The massive Kralti ships hung motionless in space while sleek human platforms maintained their protective formation. Admiral Gestalk faced an impossible choice. He could order his crews to abandon their ships and continue the operation with secondary vessels, but the humans had demonstrated the ability to disable those as well. He could declare war on humanity, but his primary fleet was currently defenseless. Or he could comply with the human demands and face the consequences from his own government. "Human vessels," he said finally, "the Kralti hegemony does not recognize your authority to interfere in our internal affairs. However, we will postpone current operations pending review by our government." "Acknowledged," the humans replied. "Withdrawal may commence immediately. Your ship's functionality will be restored once you have departed this system." As the Kralti fleet began its retreat, their systems gradually came back online. But the message was clear: humanity possessed the ability to neutralize any military force that threatened civilian populations, and they were willing to use that capability anywhere in the galaxy. The news of the Velnari incident spread throughout galactic civilization within hours. The implications were staggering. Humanity had effectively neutralized one of the galaxy's most feared military forces without firing a single shot, destroying a single ship, or causing a single casualty. They had simply made it impossible for the Kralti to carry out their intended massacre. In the Galactic Council chambers, the emergency session had devolved into chaos. Species that had built their power on military intimidation suddenly found themselves facing a civilization that could render military force irrelevant. Governments that had relied on the threat of population displacement or extermination as diplomatic tools discovered that those threats had become impossible to carry out. "This changes everything," Chancellor Vasquez said quietly. "The fundamental basis of galactic power structures has been altered overnight." Ambassador Kefvar was studying the tactical reports from the Velnari system. They didn't just disable the Kralti ships. They demonstrated surgical precision in their intervention. Life support, emergency systems, and crew safety measures continued functioning normally. They neutralized only the systems necessary for offensive operations. "The implications for military doctrine are staggering," added Security Chief Thandor. "If humans can selectively disable any technological system at will, traditional military force becomes irrelevant." But Trade Representative Nixera had identified an even more significant consequence. Economic analysis suggests that the protection protocols will fundamentally alter the calculation of conquest and expansion. The cost-benefit analysis of military aggression no longer functions when success is impossible to achieve. The truth was becoming clear to every government in the galaxy: humanity had not just developed superior technology. They had eliminated war as a viable option for any nation that targeted civilian populations. The rules of galactic civilization had been rewritten by a species that refused to accept mass murder as an acceptable diplomatic tool. Over the following days, reports arrived of human interventions throughout the galaxy. Border disputes that might have escalated to orbital bombardments were resolved through negotiation when both sides realized that humanity would prevent any attacks on civilian centers. Military operations that relied on threatening population centers as leverage found themselves unable to function when human platforms appeared to protect potential victims. The galaxy was discovering what humanity had meant when they declared that civilian safety had become their responsibility. They had not simply threatened intervention. They had developed the capability to make civilian massacre impossible for any government to carry out. 2 weeks after the protection protocols were announced, the first formal diplomatic contact was established. Not through the Galactic Council or official government channels, but through a simple message transmitted to human space: "This is the Velnari Planetary Council. We wish to express our gratitude to humanity for preserving our people from extinction. We request the establishment of formal diplomatic relations and offer our support for the protection protocols. Similar messages began arriving from species throughout the galaxy. Civilizations that had lived under the constant threat of more powerful neighbors suddenly found themselves protected by humanity's commitment to civilian safety. The galactic balance of power had shifted dramatically toward species that had never possessed significant military capability. The transformation was revolutionary. For the first time in galactic history, a civilization's survival was no longer dependent on their military strength or diplomatic alliances. It was guaranteed by a species that had decided that civilian massacre was intolerable under any circumstances. President Chen stood in the command center of the Global Defense Initiative, watching real-time reports of human interventions across the galaxy. The protection protocols were working exactly as designed. Aggressive civilizations were learning that expansion through civilian elimination was no longer possible. Peaceful species were discovering that they no longer needed to live in fear of genocide. Status report, she requested. All systems functioning optimally, Admiral Harrison replied. The intervention capability has been tested in 47 different scenarios over the past month. No civilian population has been successfully targeted for systematic elimination since the protocols were implemented. Resistance? Some governments are testing our resolve, but they're discovering that we meant exactly what we said. Military force that targets civilians simply doesn't work anymore. President Chen nodded with satisfaction. This was what humanity had achieved during their 6 months of silence. Not just the ability to defend themselves, but the capability to ensure that no other species would face the horror that had befallen the Kepler sector colonies. And the galaxy's response? Mixed but evolving. Aggressive civilizations are being forced to reconsider their expansion strategies. Peaceful species are expressing unprecedented gratitude. The overall result is a dramatic reduction in civilian casualties across known space. It was the outcome humanity had worked toward, a galaxy where civilian safety was guaranteed not by treaties or diplomatic agreements, but by the impossibility of successful attacks against civilian populations. They had made genocide technologically unfeasible. The final message came 6 months after the protection protocols were implemented. This time it was transmitted through normal diplomatic channels to every government in the galaxy. This is humanity. The protection protocols have been successfully integrated into galactic civilization. Systematic attacks on civilian populations have been reduced to zero across all monitored space. We remain committed to this principle. Our protection extends to all civilian populations regardless of species, government, or political affiliation. This protection is permanent and universal. We invite all civilizations to join us in building a galaxy where disagreements between governments never again result in the systematic extermination of innocent populations. Military conflict between consenting forces remains beyond our authority. But the era of civilian massacre as a tool of diplomacy has ended forever. We look forward to resuming full diplomatic relations with all species committed to these principles. The message marked humanity's return to galactic society, but on terms that no other species had ever established. They had used their technological capabilities not to conquer territory or accumulate resources, but to eliminate a particular form of warfare that they considered unacceptable. The galaxy had faced humanity's response to massacre, and discovered that they were indeed facing the real threat, a species that refused to tolerate the systematic extermination of civilian populations under any circumstances. The rules of galactic civilization had been permanently altered by a species that considered civilian safety to be non-negotiable. The Kepler sector colonies were gone forever, but their sacrifice had led to a transformation that would protect every civilian population in the galaxy for generations to come. Humanity had responded to massacre by making massacre impossible. And the galaxy was forever changed.